I did my PhD in anthropology at the University of Toronto, and I can tell you more about my research. I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow at Wageningen University. At the same time, I am also leading, kind of directing the Institute of Social Sciences at the University of Rojava. And I think that was the main reason that Catherine, through a friend of ours, Elif, contacted, and I became involved in this project. My research is mainly about the Kurdish movement in Turkey, specifically looking at how urban dynamics of shifting the resistance from the mountains to the city has kind of provided new spaces, new opportunities for the movement to realize itself and the project of democratic autonomy. However, how the state respond to that, and maybe you have heard about that. In 2015, there was a kind of widespread urban armed clashes between Kurdish militants and the Turkish state, where close to 15 cities were leveled to the ground. So I'm just looking at how this started, so kind of the urban dynamics of the movement. At the same time, I'm also, I have a podcast, the Kurdish edition, where I basically talk about different aspects of the Kurdish issue, politics, culture, and I have interviewed people from a variety of ranges. I know that you're interested in Palestine, Adam. Actually, I did an interview with a very very good friend of us, like a very solid scholar activist, Abdulrazak al-Takriti, about the relationship between the Kurdish movement and Palestine. So that's me. Like right now, I'm in Paris trying to establish a center for the University of Rojava.
Yeah. So do you come from Kurdistan, so-called Southeast Turkey area?
I'm coming actually from the Kurdish region of Iran, from Mahabad. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's me, and I don't know if you want to maybe find.
Absolutely. I'll start more with the autobiographical thing, because it's I'm second generation Holocaust surviving Jew, from all my grandparents from Lithuania. They took boats to South Africa in the 1920s. So there were, my grandfather lost 8 siblings, my grandmother 6, there were just 2 survivors. But very quickly they transitioned from being the Jew to being the white privileged person under apartheid. And so I grew up in this very strange situation where I was politically conscientized early. I was active from 16, and my father particularly was very critical and damning of it. And so we can get into that later, but I then had to leave the country as well because there was still military conscription. And I stumbled my way into a career in art, although I had never studied art before. I'm now a professor of the photography in the art school, IFBK in Hamburg. And you say I'm interested in Palestine. I've been making kind of work around Palestine since about the year 2000 actively. We can get into that, but and I think my key point, and I think this is something that I would almost end with, but I think it's so important, is that this idea of intersectional solidarity, that all of this, the struggles of people subjected to power, whether they are queer narratives or Black voices or Kurdish, essentially the struggle is all the same, and it's against the nation state and those people in power. And ultimately, those people have taken us to the brink of destruction of the planet. So I think it's interesting that we're together, less so about our academic approaches and interests, but actually, well, in my case, my kind of activist work, and
I mean, it would be really interesting to explore, like in this framework, in the as part in the context of those questions that Michael sent us, actually think about environment of activism actually in today's universities, and a lot of those questions, a lot of the issues that we are talking about in universities, I have to say that they are also kind of very much geographic context based, and a lot of these issues, like some of those questions, mainly, of course, it's also about the other people, but in Syria, in Kurdistan, in Palestine, I think we need to address that there are like some real serious issues that they are also facing. So this intersectional solidarity that you mentioned, I really think that we need to discuss that more. We need to talk about what sort of international solidarity we are proposing at universities as part of that, because it's not only like they're all like quite interrelated issues. I mean, migration, war, a lot of issues with the environmental issues could be traced back to some of these real fundamental problems that we have in some regions. So I think we need to also address those. And I want to say that for all of us, I'm not sure about you, Adam, but for me especially, the moment of this realization, the moment of getting active and do something started at the university. And my activism actually started with Palestine at York University in Toronto.
So you've hit a key point here. I went, I wouldn't call it going to university. I studied at the University of the Witwatersrand, WITS in Johannesburg, 1980, late 87 to 89, early 90. This was the height of the emergency. It was the height of the struggle, the peak. Mm-hmm. I think I went to 2 lectures in 3 years. I studied sociology and history of art. Either I was stoned, but most of the time I was in political meetings or in political actions. This is where I learned about what I now understand is this white privilege, which was being used. We had 2 organizations, the National Union of South African Students, that were for the white students, and the Black Student Society. Mm-hmm. We were behind the scenes taking orders from the BSS and enacting them. But I think you've said exactly the key point is, and when I compare this point where we were in South Africa and the role that universities played, compared to what's happened to the universities in Israel, mm-hmm. who have, over the last 10 years, not very subtly got rid of pretty much the entire left wing and critical. My sociology professor was assassinated by the state. Multiple academics were murdered. So the thing is that my training or my thought process, my critical thinking was formed in the university, even though I wasn't sitting in a lecture theatre. And I think this is the thing that's changed now. And I'd like to know about your experience, because I have been teaching for many years, 17 odd years, but always in the arts.
Yeah.
And particularly in Germany, where you know that to talk about BDS is illegal.
Right.
I have found in the universities I've taught at until about 2 years ago, and I think this is why I don't think this is a pessimistic discussion necessarily, because why are people not on the streets? Why during the poll tax riots, the students were on the streets, right? In Johannesburg, the students are on the streets about the fees. Why is it not happening everywhere? But I've experienced this personally. I teach in 2 schools, one in Hamburg, and then I teach at the Royal Academy in The Hague. And in the last 2 years, and I'm proud to say it came out of the photography department, but organizations that deal with critical diversity and they're student-led movements. And in The Hague, it was so powerful that they managed to get rid of the dean of the school and the entire board of trustees, because it was identified how toxic the system was. So I think if we listen to the 20-year-olds.
Yeah. I mean, the nature of student activism has changed a lot. Like I personally, I was part of the student movement in Iran in late 90s and the beginning of 2000s. Was during the time that, of course, Iran was experiencing a really huge shift from this fundamentalist religious government towards doing a little bit of reforms. It wasn't anything like any revolutionary, but it provided some sort of space for people to express themselves. And I remember during those years, and it was in Iran, we had free tribunes at our university in Tehran where students would come with their whiteboard, and there was this friend of us, like a very radical, very passionate person, put on the whiteboard, write Islamic Republic of Iran, and one by one would tell us why it is not Islamic, why it is not Republic, and why it is not Iran. So even in that time in Iran, there was like such an environment, and people, as soon as there is like a moment, there is like some space, the level of creativity in political and like social activism is just incredible. And I always wonder, like since I went to Canada in 2009, like I got involved with so many student groups, and I tried to be part of the movements in Canada around Indigenous solidarity, Indigenous sovereignty, as well as around migrant justice and around Palestine, the BDS, as well as around the Kurdish issue. And for a while, like, it's interesting. Today, I got a reminder from Facebook that 10 years ago, it was the first day of Occupy Toronto. So for a while, it was like a really lively, people were quite engaged by, but I don't know, in the last 6-7 years, I have been feeling that there is like basically a silence and like a kind of inactivity, and people are kind of not very passionate. And it's very interesting to see that there is a shift of activism from universities to high schools right now. And high schools, like, for example, in the United States, in Europe, like, well, the example of Greta, of course, is out there. They started organizing to talk about some real issues, like, for example, gun violence in the United States, but of course, more bigger issues like quite important issues like climate change and the works that many high school groups, students around Europe mainly, but around the world are doing. So it's very interesting how universities are changing the role and becoming this kind of managerial commercial place for some people to go there, stay on in those walls and get some skills and out. It's like a kind of manufacturing production line, something like this.
Yeah. Can I respond?
Of course.
Okay, thanks for that. I think when I looked at all of the questions that Michael and his colleagues put together, I think that there's a fundamental flaw that runs through all of them, which is to speak about education and educational institutions in isolation from the rest of society. And each question implies the idea of how can we improve the university or education so that it restores democratic vitality as opposed to rivalry. How can we, and it's much like what I'm saying about intersectional solidarity. In 1988, I think, or 1989, Cyril Ramaphosa, who's now the president of South Africa, he was head of COSAS, the Congress of South African Trade Unions. And you had an organization called the UDF, the United Democratic Front, which, in my experience, I've never seen a grassroots democratic structure. Every block in the township had a representative who answered to the whole kind of bigger block, and it extended out. And they were all in touch with the trade unions. So that means, everything from labor to domestic rights to things to sewerage, everything was being dealt with. And I will never forget, I think it was 88 or 89, is a meeting of this Congress of South African Unions in our student hall, in like the main floor, and the power, and then we went on a march, and there was this little 17-year-old Umlungu, little white boy, but the sheer power of that, I think that this is, for me, this is not a problem of going into the university and giving it some Botox and like extracting some fat from there and like killing that libertarian and wiping out that, radical capitalist. It's more about relinking these institutions to the rest of the world. And what I mean by that is not corporations but things like unions and things like pre-Thatcher, certainly pre-Blair, pre-Reagan, tactics. And so I just wanted to make that point because I think to see these institutions in isolation is part of the problem.
Can I ask you a question, Adam?
Yeah.
Like in your interactions with students and of course, different types, there are probably coming from different backgrounds and with different motivations. But I'm really wondering, like, probably I don't have this many years of teaching experience as yourself. Like what students are talking about, maybe we can also address that. Like, I mean, not talking about like kind of listing, categorizing the problems that they have or issues. Of course, we know what we are all dealing with, but like kind of in terms of motivation, in terms of like your question of coming to the streets, coming to the scene, taking active lead and making some changes. Kind of, I don't know how to frame it. Like, what is their kind of issues that kind of prevent them or maybe motivate them to become more active?
I get you. I think beginning with the Me Too movement, but not just that, but that was a striking moment shift, and followed on by Black Lives Matter and other struggles that intersect. Students feel a lot more empowered. I mean, Sardar, I walked into this German art school, which is one of the oldest in Europe, as a professor of a class. And I got the shock of my life. It resembled the early 19th century or something. Like the professor was, held in esteem, was never challenged. The students dressed like him, and I say him because it was all him at that point. They made work like him. And there's been a fundamental shift now, which is this notion of diversity. When I started in Hamburg 6 years ago, I remember sitting in interviews with potential new students, increasingly from other countries, and fellow professors making sexist or xenophobic or racist remarks. And what we did this year is made sure that we had a member of the student body from the critical diversity representing, and during the interviews calling out the professors who were unaware, let's say, give them the benefit of the doubt of their behavior, but correcting them. And what I'm trying to say is, I think, also, you could go to UCL International Relations School, where they're basically, I guess, training CIA operatives. I don't know, I don't know the landscape. But what I can just see is, over these many years, first of all, the kind of male white domination of these institutions, and the language of critique is a very interesting one. That's changed a lot, where I certainly have tried to break down the hierarchy that the entire structure, but each class mirrors, right? So, and what starts happening is then ultimately we should be rendered redundant as teachers, because the class can run itself. But yeah. I'm not sure if that's answering what you were asking.
I mean, like my worry, or in the context of what we want to discuss in those questions that we have, I think there is also a kind of shift between, maybe there was from the beginning, but not at this level, a kind of shift between knowledge to skills, or what you know, or the knowledge that you get, or you learn, or you create at the universities, assuming this university, which is a free space, which is a kind of providing the opportunity for students to flourish in all levels. We see this kind of change, that knowledge can only be valuable or have an added value because of the market, because of the outside, or the applicability of this knowledge, the kind of skills that you might need to succeed. You won't agree?
No, I mean, of course I agree with you at this moment in time, but I think that we are seeing a collapse of that. It's collapsing, the system. I have a nephew who's honestly one of these. He's an absolute genius. He was handpicked to a university which teaches coding for 5 years. Every 6 months they move to a different city in a different continent. Now, this is the elite, and when you're talking coding, you know what his partner's interested in kind of neuropsychology. He's interested in finance. Whatever you've got but these people are building the future of all of those industries. And I said to him, in 5 years of daily lectures, how many minutes or lectures did you have of ethics? And he said 0. And right. There's no Hippocratic oath when you study economics or when you study coding. And when you're told to build a bridge, they don't teach you to say, is it to carry bread across the river or for the Nazis to cross the river. You just build the fucking bridge with your knowledge, and you do it as efficiently as possible. And for me, I think I see a resurgence of this, the students feeling entitled to feel safe, entitled to feel heard, entitled not to be discriminated against. That's emerging, and I have huge amount of faith because of that. And amongst those students are people who have utter privilege, alongside people who come from the communities we're talking about. You know?
I mean, let me narrow it down. With knowledge, what I meant more humanities and kind of a free range of debates, conversations, discussions, like things that may not be really useful. We always make this joke when we get our PhD. It's another useless PhD, but and there is an attack against the humanities, against social sciences, and like for example, at the University of Toronto, my university, we still have this guy Jordan Peterson. I don't know how much you know him, but he was basically someone who would attack our department and different departments of humanities, and they would say they are basically creating Marxists, and that what they are teaching there is like all Marxism and postmodernism and a lot of other bullshit that he said. But I mean, saying that is one thing, and turning that into an action is another thing, which is very dangerous. And we had friends at our department, like queer trans friends, who were attacked because of this very toxic arguments that this guy proposed. Like, I mean, it's probably just like one example, but in general, many universities, they see humanities, social sciences as philosophy departments, as places where Michael mentioned someone, chancellor of the Universities of the Highlands, and calling them as vanity courses, or courses that basically create people who would not be useful for the system, or maybe against. And there is an attack against those people who try to think, teach, and talk different materials, different literature. So my point was like more like how this knowledge has become less valuable, and like having some practical skills for future. Even in social sciences, the whole thing has become how to publish, how to find publications, how to write a good cover letter, how to build networks, and how to be more creative teacher without really talking about what we are teaching and what we are discussing in our classrooms.
Okay, now I get it. It's difficult for me to respond because, you know, I only teach in art schools or universities that have a photography department. My first response to you would be, it's not what's taught, it's by whom. Because I mean, if you think they think the humanities are vanity projects, can you imagine what they think about fine art degrees? I mean, you know, but you can have an incredibly conservative professor of painting who's going to be a misogynist and a you know, so equally you can have somebody who's in the department of language, which I think like Ariel Azoulay, who is at Brown University. You know, she was denied tenure in Israel. It's clear that she was kicked out of academia because she was one of the most progressive radical thinkers on the planet, never mind just in that country, right? So I think the first thing is to say, who's in control of the curriculum It's not just the humanities versus economics. Because if somebody was teaching economics, but they were teaching people to deal with it with a critical eye and a critical mode of thinking, that breeds radical people. I believe it would be interesting to see if you could teach dentistry with some with a radical critical perspective. But
decolonization in dentistry.
So, Sardar, I just want to tell you about this one incident that happened maybe 4 or 5 years ago at the Royal Academy of Arts in The Hague. We had a faculty of about 35 people just in the photography department, and the head of the HR department, who was the only person of color in the room of 35 other people, began to explain to us that they were having a very difficult time recruiting anyone from The Hague, from ethnic minority groups, like from Suriname, from Turkey, and her explanation was that these kids are not interested in art or design.
Wow.
Right? I mean, just let that sink in. And a number of us stood up and in fury. And what one person who comes from the kind of fashion department said, you know, skinny jeans. You know, everyone wears skinny jeans. You know where they come from? They come from Japanese skate kids. You know, and I mean that's a banal example. But what I said is, you know what you've got wrong? These kids are the avant-garde, but they're not interested in the Royal Academy of Art.
Right.
They're not interested in your stamp of approval. So it's us who has to do the restructuring, not to entrance them or make us inviting, but to meet their high standards. And I'm not sure if there's a parallel in the kind of different in the academia, very much academia that you're in, but that was a moment for me that shook me about
right.
how the institution perceives itself in opposition or exclusion from others, the other.
Yeah. I mean, like in other institutions, we have heard many stories of discrimination, and sometimes, like they are even justified because of exactly what you said. Like some people thought that, like leading someone over there thinks that, like in your context, that these people are not interested in this kind of work or not able. And like anthropology, let's say, it's like quite male-dominated, like a white discipline has been, and like still many departments are dealing with issues like how to see people coming from non-white backgrounds, people of color, those who in anthropology calling them native anthropologists, like probably myself, and the way that we categorize the people based on how our work is like modern, is progressive, is different, is something that probably those people could not understand. And even if we bring them, we need to lead those people. So a lot of executive positions, a lot of those leading positions are still, many institutions that I am aware of are basically reserved for people who are coming from those mentalities. Like,
you know, my brother got a Rhodes scholarship from South Africa to go to Oxford, and this is a true story. He's 10 years older than me, and I remember he said to me on the phone once, he said, "I have met the most despicable person on the planet, and he's going to be Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and it was
Wow.
Boris Johnson. But there we have the extreme example of like, the almost the aristocratic, the political class of being funneled into the thing. But what I'm saying more is that I am, and I promise you this, I'm not just saying it, I am learning more from my students because they're in touch with new technologies, new languages, new modes of conduct, new ways of imparting information, and new logic systems. I look at my kids, they are watching a documentary on YouTube, they're writing an essay, they're listening to music, and they've got a book open. Now my biggest problem with the way these talks have been set up is they're calling in the so-called experts again. Even though we might be nice, we may sound like nice people, and we've got our hearts in the right place. But we're the 20-year-olds, man. That's they should be leading this thing.
Yeah, I agree. Let me also give you an example, Adam. We at the University of Rojava this summer we did a summer school with the University of Bremen. And it was like basically a course on Rojava and possibilities. These possibilities could be a different set of relationships, a different kind of community organizing, a different society, a different politics, an alternative world. And we were all very much inspired by David Graeber, late David Graeber. And this is what he is basically, he did work on for quite a long time on possibilities. And let me say that I was incredibly impressed and inspired by those students at Bremen. And they were undergraduate students. Our students were graduate, final year of the kind of transition year between undergrad and graduate studies. Like we had like a 3 people instructors. We were all very, very impressed by the way that they are building connections, like from Rojava, different work, different kind of environment, different issues, and with some like 20 to 24 years old German and people, students at Bremen, probably not all German. The way they were talking about issues, they were talking about like social movements in Bremen, in Germany, and also our students in Rojava. They talked about the efforts to create grassroots organizations, grassroots assemblies, different kind of society, alternative spaces. It was basically a process of learning for me and for the teachers. And it came to a point that students said, you know what, you guys are talking too much. We want to be in relationship with each other. We want to talk to each other because I felt that I don't have a lot to tell them, and they are really passionate, and they want to create, they want to explore these possibilities. But what happens that in a process of studying or like in this transition between university and society or the system, these possibilities, like even sometimes when it appears in very radical forms, become into something else. Like, I mean, in student groups, in student movements, we all had like a really inspiring, very important slogans. Like, for example, with migrant justice groups at the universities in Canada, we had this No Borders slogan. But at the same time, we had to deal with some real, like very small issues, like a bill that goes to the parliament, a person who's going to be deported, a small issue, let's say like doing workshops for service providers, how to deal with people who are undocumented. Like from the slogan, we come to this kind of very small steps. And with the students, we see that they are to explore possibilities, to create something else.
Yeah, and I think the way I interpret that, which is a beautiful thing, is the personal is the political, because you can be as loud and galvanizing as Che Guevara, and what you produce and the way you treat your kids is a horror show. But I do want to just say one thing. Like I say, I hardly got a Bachelor of Arts because of South Africa, but I was lucky enough to make friends with someone called Eyal Weitzman, who you must know his work in forensic architecture. Anyway, he set up the first PhD he set up was a small group called the Round Table, which was called Research Architecture. I will be grateful to him for as long as I live, because he invited me to audit. I wasn't eligible to do a PhD, but he allowed me every week to sit in on these round tables and listen. And by listening, I started to learn the language of the most sophisticated critical thinkers. And slowly, like without you knowing, the kind of knowledge seeps in, and my life changed after that, and my work changed. And so I think I'd like to just end on saying that kind of critical thinking is what is most important. That for me is really the kind of critical thing, because knowledge can backfire. I don't know if you know the photographer Susan Marsalis. You must do, because she made the book on. Now I know Susan, and she was speaking at a conference in Cairo. And at the end of the talk about this project, I said to her, Susan, has this archive ever backfired? Mm-hmm. And she said, "God damn you, Adam!" And she said, "No." And she was visibly upset, because she said, in 2003, was it Cheney or one of them held up her book as part justification to invade Iraq. Mm. Okay, because of what Saddam Hussein had done to the Kurds, right? Yeah. So can you imagine the horror that went down her spine? Yeah. And the point is that I think no matter how progressive knowledge is, we think it can be used. Like, look at these libertarians, Peter Thiel, and fucking go to Mars this one and go to Mars that one. Look what they're using, like knowledge. So. But just to end for me is I'm so eternally grateful for having, in a gentle way, learned critical thinking, and yeah.
Yeah, it was a pleasure, Adam, to listen to you, to talk to you. Also very grateful for this opportunity to talk about some issues that are important for today's higher education. Like, maybe I would also end it with a little bit talking about the University of Rojava, because I was invited to be part of this initiative because of that work. And I want to go back to the first point that I started with, that we need, and also, as you said, intersectional solidarity. We need to also think about international solidarity. We need to also think about how to engage students in finding some solutions, some a way out for people who live in absolute misery under authoritarian regimes, experiencing forced displacement, war, death in their families, and the human degradation and the loss of the meaning of life in those places, mostly in Syria, but also other places in the region. So I think it's also crucial to think about students' engagements and student activism and higher education in our curriculum, in our discussions, to seriously go after those global issues as well, and not get burned out, not get bored, or like too much news, too much bad, too much things happening over there, and it's not going to be over. This is how basically people in North America talk about Israel-Palestine and like a peace in the Middle East.
No, life is a long game. If I can just add one thing to that great point, which is I think part of education should be the ability to unlearn what we have all learned, because we're all full of toxicity.
That's true.
All of us. And I think to be able to engage with the humility and the discipline of being able to unlearn, it should be across the board, from dentistry to engineering to neuropsychology, human sciences, or painting.
I mean, this co-creating knowledge, of course, it has to be with students when we talk about a university in London, a university in Hamburg, for example, or in Toronto. But I also think and insist that this co-creating must be done with the most marginalized, unheard people around the world. Like we talk about decolonization, we gotta listen to indigenous people. We gotta create the knowledge or remove this toxicity through talking to them, and through creating the knowledge and recreating, co-creating knowledge with them.
Sardar, that's why we're at such a beautiful moment, because we have a generation now of what even my mother calls woke. A woke generation from all of these communities, all of these ethnic backgrounds, all of these various ranges of trauma, from genocide to personal things. And because of various things, the internet and many other things, we've got this amazing generation that have a voice, they have things to say, and they're going to call out people, one another, and it's a beautiful thing, and for me it's been the most amazing thing. It's just that. But we could talk for hours, and I really I'm very happy to have met you, really.